It is Wednesday, July 18th, 2018, and this is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a Seahawks podcast with myself, Kenneth Arthur of FieldGulls.com and Rob Staton of SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Where pretty much every week we get together and we talk about the Seattle Seahawks or the draft and the NFL at large. And given that it is July 18th, 2018, we can say it's the middle of summer, not a lot going on. Training camp is starting up in a few weeks. The preseason is coming up faster and faster. The NFL's kickoff is 50 days away, but we still have to fill those 50 days, and it is getting closer and closer. We're further away from the Eagles' Super Bowl win and finally getting to say that the 2018 season is back upon us, where we can watch the Seahawks and talk about actual developments instead of speculation and, doubt and skepticism and hope and optimism and all of those things that are wrapped up in things that haven't happened yet. And, of course, part of that pessimism will surround this situation of Earl Thomas as long as he wants to let it surround the Seattle Seahawks. 50 days to go until the regular season begins. Earl Thomas has a few more weeks to decide if he's going to show up to training camp or if he's really going to stick to it. Going on Instagram this week to, make a post saying that first that he's an underdog, which I don't know how that's true in any sense of the word. And second of all, that, he is going to either pay me or trade me. I understand that it's a business is, the paraphrasing of what Earl Thomas says. But it does sound like he's both taking it personally and saying it's a business. So I'm not sure exactly where Earl Thomas stands. I think he's obviously on the side of he wants money beyond 2018 because he knows how fickle the sport is, how easily the body can break down and take away an NFL player's future earnings. He saw Cam Chancellor get that guarantee and that security that will be, forcing the Seahawks, not forcing as in they made the choice to do it, but, the Seahawks will be paying Cam Chancellor something like $12 million this year to not play, another $5 million next year, I think. It's a lot of money, and they don't maybe want to dedicate that to another safety who could find himself in harm's way after, 8 seasons of playing in the NFL. So it's an interesting standoff and one that may not end anytime soon. Rob, if we're getting into this one more time and hopefully, for the last time in terms of it being a holdout, but unlikely for it to end anytime soon, what exactly is Earl standing to gain at this point as we approach training camp, as we get closer to the preseason, as the Seahawks apparently, for all intents and purposes, prepare to play this season without Earl Thomas? What does he stand to gain?
Well, absolutely nothing. I kind of find this situation a little bit embarrassing, I have to say. And I'd kind of compare it to this. It's kind of, it'd be like an estate agent trying to either sell your house for you, for example, coming up to you and going, well, you just live in the house or just give it away. I mean, you'd never accept that. That's the position that the Seahawks are in right now. I'll just live in the house or just give it away to those people down the road at no cost at all. I mean, that's just not how you do business. Earl says that he understands it's a business and then speaks like he has absolutely zero business sense at all. And he needs to stop posting Instagram messages, period. But then he needs to stop posting them and directing them at the Seahawks, because the Seahawks are completely doing everything that you would expect them to do. Nobody can criticize the Seahawks here. They clearly don't want to extend his contract. A lot of fans are going to disagree with that and feel that Earl Thomas deserves to be paid. I understand that. He's a great player. He's been a great player for the Seahawks. You've also got to, even if you hold that position, understand where they're coming from. They've given third contracts to Cam Chancellor, to Marshawn Lynch, and to Michael Bennett, and have been completely screwed as a consequence of those. Just over 18 months ago, Earl Thomas was talking about retiring. So they're clearly going to be conservative and wary about giving him a huge extension. Apparently, he wants to be paid as much as Eric Berry. The Seahawks are not going to give him that kind of money. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. And they may have had talks and said, look, this is where we're at. We're willing to pay you this as a compromise. And Earl Thomas, as people might say, no, he wants Eric Berry money. So if that's the case, then what are they going to do? They're not going to pay him. They're not going to extend him. They'll go into the season, he's under contract, and then see how the situation goes. They've also got the franchise tag as an option in the offseason if they want to use it. From Earl Thomas's point of view there, then he's saying, okay, I'm not going to get extended. Then just trade me. But who's knocking the door down to trade him? The Seahawks have been trying to trade him for months, or at least, let me phrase that a different way. I don't think they've been trying to trade him. I think they've just been open to trading him. And everybody's known that they've been open to trading him. So if you wanted Earl Thomas by now, you probably could have had him. If you'd offered the Seahawks a second-round pick during the draft, you'd probably have him. If you offered them a third-round pick now, you might still get him. I mean, that's kind of where we're at now with his contract running down. They might take a third-round pick. Nobody's come in for him. If he really wants to go to the Dallas Cowboys, his next Instagram post needs to be directed at Jerry Jones saying, are you going to trade for me or not? Because let's make this happen. Because the Seahawks aren't paying me. And if you are willing to pay me, then trade for me. That's what he needs to be saying. Not complaining at the Seahawks. Because from the Seahawks perspective, they have absolutely zero motivation to do anything. They don't want to extend him. They don't have to trade him for absolutely nothing. If someone offers a fair deal, then they're going to make the move. And they will claim to any other team, a year ago they spent a second-round pick on Sheldon Richardson and gave them Jermaine Kearse to the New York Jets. And then during the season, they paid a second and a third-round pick for Dwayne Brown. Earl Thomas is better than both of those players. So why should they accept a fourth or a fifth-round pick for Earl Thomas right now? They shouldn't. So I really don't get where Earl Thomas is coming from here. And that's why I kind of find the whole thing a little bit sad and a little bit embarrassing as well, because I don't think he's helping his cause at all. I think we're already seeing it, that fans are becoming a little bit less patient with the situation and the saga. You're starting to see people just saying, just move on from him. And you're even seeing some people saying he shouldn't be in the Ring of Honor anymore, which I don't agree with at all. But that's the way that it's got. And I think the last thing we need to see is yet another legendary Seahawks player battling with this team at a time when you want everybody pulling together, moving in the same direction. I sincerely hope that Earl Thomas realizes he can't win this situation. He's not going to be able to force a trade or an extension, and he gets into training camp and the Seahawks can have a good go in 2018. My fear is that he's going to hold out. Pete Carroll's going to be asked about it every single week, that it might have an impact on the team, that it might have an impact on people like Frank Clark, who I think liked the Instagram post, and that this is just going to drag on. And if it does, who knows what kind of an impact that's going to have.
Rob, when looking at the Seahawks defense as it currently stands, I'm curious your thoughts on the overall quality and comparing it to the previous, 3 or 4 seasons, not necessarily in what they'll be expected to do. It's a high expectation to say, will they replace Richard Sherman? Will they replace Michael Bennett? Will they replace Cliff Averill? Will they replace Sheldon Richardson? Will they replace Cam Chancellor? A lot of big names. But it is interesting, like when people ask me about the Seahawks, and try to have, when we have like a casual conversation, if someone finds out I write about football and I write about the Seahawks and they're saying, oh, where do you think they are right now? And it's like, it's interesting because at the end of the day, when you talk about the elite players that we know of on the Seahawks, it really comes down to Bobby Wagner and then like Earl Thomas and KJ Wright. And it's like there's a drop-off, not necessarily that, like a guy like Frank Clark can't be better than Michael Bennett or Cliff Averill, but we haven't seen it yet. So I'm curious from your standpoint, and also knowing that, you have spent a lot of time studying younger guys, and you can look at it from the perspective of some of these younger guys like Frank Clark, Jaron Reed, Nazir Jones, Rasheem Green, Shaquille Griffin, some of maybe Delano Hill, looking at some of these younger guys and the defense that they have. Do you think that the potential is there for the Seahawks defense to be better than it was last season? Do you think that the Seahawks have the potential with these guys in place now, not necessarily saying, look, we know that they're as good, but do you think that they have a lot of potential, or do you think that to get up to those 2013 levels, or do you think that there's still some more reloading to do, and that simply put, it's unlikely that, Rasheem Green may have this type of impact of a Cliff Averill, or that Shaquille Griffin will ever have the type of impact that Richard Sherman had. So it's hard to compare, but what are your thoughts on the roster as it stands right now as compared to the younger guys?
Well, I don't think they're ever going to get back to the 2013 level, even if they have, a couple more great drafts. I mean, that was an all-time NFL defense, and it's very hard to recreate that. And the teams have been trying to recreate that over the last few years and have failed. So I don't think that's likely. I think how I would describe it is the obvious concern, I think, is the pass rush. I don't think it's the secondary, even if Earl Thomas isn't part of that. I think that we've seen over the years that if you look back at Super Bowl teams in recent history. I don't think they've necessarily had huge loaded defenses full of star names the way that the Seahawks did in 2013. What they've generally had is a very good pass rush, and I'd say sort of 3 or 4 core defensive players that you can structure around. And the Seahawks will have that, with Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, with Frank Clark. Hopefully will take the next step. They've got 1 or 2 pieces there that they can work with, and there's young guys coming through, and you're hopeful that 1 or 2 of these guys with more playing time could really emerge to become really strong starters. So I don't think it's a huge issue. I just wonder whether or not they've got the pass rush depth, because in 2011 you could see they were relying a bit too much on one guy, and that was Chris Clemens. They needed to boost the number of options they had up front. And then in 2012 they brought in Bruce Irvin, but still they didn't quite have that pass rush going. And it was only really when they got Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett in a coup of a free agency double act that they managed to take that next step and sort of deliver on the potential that they had. So, yeah, I mean, it's not really that I'm saying Rasheem Green isn't going to have a huge impact, or that Dion Jordan isn't, or that Jaron Reed and people like that are not going to come in and have a huge impact. You're obviously very hopeful that they're going to. It's just, it needs to be seen first. Green's a rookie. How much impact can he have in year 1? It's debatable. Is he a guy for 2 or 3 years down the line? Can Dion Jordan stay healthy? Can Naz Jones take the next step? Can Jaron Reed take the next step? Can Frank Clark become the guy, as opposed to the guy who just happens to play next to Frank Clark or Michael Bennett or Cliff Averill? These are big question marks there. So I think the defense overall has obviously got some question marks. I don't think it's ever going to get back to 2013. I also don't think it's going to necessarily be a liability. And given the number of players they didn't have last year, you could see in certain games, the Philadelphia Eagles home game, for example, where they were very strong, very competent, shut down Carson Wentz. It was before he got injured, really limited the Eagles. And you could see there, yes, this is a defense, even missing its big names, that can perform. And I trust Pete Carroll and his coaching staff and the job that he's done in Seattle over all these years to put a defensive product on the field. And I think the good thing for the Seahawks is whenever you've got a quarterback and you can complement that quarterback and have an identity on offense and function and be physical, then you've got an opportunity to win games in the NFL and go far into the postseason. And the Seahawks do have a quarterback. Hopefully they're going to have a better running game this year. And if they put those 2 things together, that running game is vital, not just for Russell Wilson, but for the defense as well. Everything knits together. The quarterback, the point guard quarterback, the running game, and the defense all have to become one with the special teams. And if the Seahawks can do that, then they can maybe surprise a few people this year.
One other question that I have is a little random, but just because I'm kind of excited, one of the players that I'm most excited to see in training camp is punter Michael Dickson. So I'm curious, we talked about him during the draft or after the draft. We maybe have discussed him briefly since then, but how excited do you think fans should be for Michael Dickson, as much as you can be for a punter? Do you think that this is a guy who, especially during a season of supposed transition, when there's going to be big name players leaving, sometimes it feels like a guy that's exciting on special teams, whether it's Tyler Lockett in 2015 or, especially for the Seahawks, where special teams has been an issue. They haven't ranked very well in punting over the last few years. How exciting or kind of uplifting do you think the play of Michael Dickson could be, given that he is a 5th-round punter, that he does have some interesting backstory? Like, how much would you prepare for, like, hey, I think Michael Dickson might be a guy that during spring training and the preseason training camp and the preseason and the beginning of the NFL season, we'll actually have fans talking quite a bit on Twitter and talking about Michael Dickson quite a bit.
Well, possibly. He obviously has a very interesting path through to college football, and then had a very good time at Texas. And people who follow Texas, and you have to put the asterisks there because they could be a little bit biased, all think that he's going to be the next best thing in special teams. So, and that he can be a weapon and can really flip the field. And listen, the bonus of having a great punter is really evident with the Los Angeles Rams. You've seen the way that their punter is able to win field position for that team. And over the years, the Seahawks have been able to win that battle as well. And it just makes such a big difference. I mean, there were games last year where we'd never sort of seen this under Pete Carroll, at least not since the early years, where the Seahawks opponent was starting pretty much on halfway or even in the Seahawks half. And then if the Seahawks got the ball back, they'd be starting on the 3-yard line. And that would go on for a half. And the Seahawks would end up putting themselves in a real bind and having to chase the game. And it's a major aspect. While the number of conversations that, we as fans or people in the media talk about, for example, elite quarterbacks, it's little things like field position over the course of a season that can really impact how far you go and whether you win a division or whether you get to the playoffs or whether you actually go on a playoff run. So those little advantages over the course of a season matter, which is why someone like Michael Dickson could end up being, a bit of a surprise star for the Seahawks this year. But the other thing I would say is that often there's no rhyme or reason to a good kicker becoming a good kicker or a good punter becoming a good punter. He's been a second-round pick on a kicker like the Buccaneers did, and you end up cutting him. He bounces around the league and never seems to be able to make it. And he was absolutely money in college football, goes to the NFL, and looks like he's never kicked a field goal in his life. And great punters will emerge from small schools, having been undrafted free agents, having bounced around the league for years. Stephen Hauschka did a great job for the Seahawks. Who would have even heard of him before the Seahawks had signed him? So there's no real rhyme or reason to whether these guys succeed. So whether Michael Dickson's going to be a success or not, I find really hard to project. I've spent no time at all studying punters in college and how games translate to the NFL. It really is just going to be a case of there's a football, go and boot it during preseason, go and show us what you can do in a game, and let's see if you can beat out John Ryan. But they have to think about the future now, and that's the thing. If Dickson can show any kind of potential, I think you've got to think long term there. If you cut Dickson and he goes somewhere else and you have one more year of John Ryan, in a year you're looking for another punter. And that's the situation. As much as they might be talking this up as a legit competition, and maybe it will be, I think Michael Dickson's going to pretty much have to shat the bed in order to not get this job, because John Ryan is a short-term option now. He is getting older. How old is he? He's going to be 37 this year. So can he keep going on and on and on? And his salary is going to be higher. Or do you go with a cheaper guy who you've got club control with over a few years, you've spent the draft pick on him, and you give him a chance to develop? That's the question that may just tip it in the favor of someone like Dickson.
Let's move away from the Seahawks for the rest of the podcast, perhaps. And for those of you that are tuned in right now, they're not going to talk about the Seahawks. I'm out of here. Hey, listen up. You got to hear about the Seahawks opponents. We're talking about the NFC West. The Seahawks, any team, as far as I'm concerned, is only as good or is only as bad as the people that they play and the teams in their division and where you're going to rank in that division. Just ask the New England Patriots, who for the last 18 years or whatever have been able to roll to an AFC East win over and over and over again. You just got to make the playoffs. And the AFC East has so rarely provided a team to challenge the Patriots. And for the Seahawks, they've had challenges over and over and over again since Pete Carroll took over in 2010, whether it was the San Francisco 49ers, the Arizona Cardinals, and now the LA Rams. The Seahawks outlasted those first two teams. Now the San Francisco 49ers making a bit of a comeback. The Rams loading up even harder than they did from last year after going 11-5. The Rams leading the league in scoring and being able to have a defense with Aaron Donald. And this week, giving Brandon Cooks a giant $80+ million extension, despite never having played with Jared Goff, despite never having played for Sean McVay. And it's an interesting move, and it certainly is one that, makes him one of the highest paid receivers / non-quarterbacks in the NFL. So you're looking at the situation with the Rams, who also still have a holdout situation with Aaron Donald. This is a team that has a lot of big-name free agents next season, some big-name free agents the year after that. They do have cap space, which allowed them to sign Brandon Cooks. But, Rob, when you're looking at the Rams just on offense right now, their decision to trade for Brandon Cooks and, basically essentially replace Sammy Watkins, you can look at it, too, and say, is Sammy Watkins basically about the same annual cost of Brandon Cooks now? Sammy Watkins going to the Kansas City Chiefs. How much more do you fear Brandon Cooks in this offense? How good do you think this offense will be next year? Do you think it'll be the best offense in the NFL with Todd Gurley, with, Andrew Whitworth at left tackle, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods? They've still, to me, seem to, they've still got this quarterback who I don't necessarily think is going to be in the top 8 or so of the NFC. It's a very good conference when it comes to quarterbacks. But the decision to swap out Sammy Watkins for Brandon Cooks, the decision to give Cooks this huge extension at a time when they haven't, signed Aaron Donald. What are your thoughts on the Rams changes and their moves on offense this year?
It's a curious move, to spend what they did on Cooks. They obviously really believe in him, and they clearly have a role earmarked for someone like that, because Sammy Watkins came in and they spent a second-round pick on that guy, and then it never really took off, did he, in the Rams offense, which is a bit of a surprise given that pretty much every aspect of the offense was really cooking on gas, but they never really got Watkins involved. They're going to get the comp pick back for him, I think, because he obviously has got that huge deal, and a lot of their moves in free agency involved players that were cut, like Ndamukong Suh, so they're not going to lose their comp picks. So that'd be some benefit. But then they're going straight for Brandon Cooks. He's a different player to Watkins. I really liked him at Oregon State. Really liked him in the build-up to the draft, and the way that he started in New Orleans was encouraging. But here's the thing. I mean, two teams have traded him now. The Saints moved him on and went with a rookie instead that they drafted in the second round. The Patriots had him for, a year, and they've traded him. And now the Rams get their turn. And there's always something a little bit suspicious when a guy's had 3 teams in 3 seasons. What is it about this guy that Bill Belichick and Sean Payton didn't quite want around? Was it just the potential to trade him and get something back? Was it just the offer of the deal was too good because he's gone for a lot of, was it 2 first-round picks he's been traded for now? Or maybe that was what it is. Or is it just that he's not quite, it's difficult to fit him into a system and really max him out, that he's got the talent, he's got everything, but he's small and he just doesn't quite have the impact, or you don't see teams game planning maybe enough for him and to warrant the huge expense. And the Rams have rolled the dice a little bit on him. And as you mentioned there, Kenny, there's guys still to pay there. There's not quite as many as you might think. I mean, they've paid Cooks now. That's going to eat into their cap room. I think they had about $65 million for 2019 before this Cooks deal. That's going to drop a little bit. Aaron Donald is presumably at some point going to get an enormous contract. He's 27 now. He's going to be looking to make up for lost time. You would think $20 million a year is about the range that he's going to get. They have to make a decision on LaMarcus Joyner, who's a franchise player this year. Do they look to extend him in a year's time? The safety market has kind of collapsed. So what they're going to do with him? Big question mark there. And Ndamukong Suh, do they want to re-sign him? There's 1 or 2 other players that they might be interested in keeping as well. So they've got some big choices coming up. And of course, they've got to plan for when they're eventually, presumably, going to pay Jared Goff as well. So they're all in on this year. It just seems, maybe this is the Seahawks fan in me speaking here, Kenny, but doesn't it just remind you a little bit of the dream team with the Eagles? That everything was set up for them to have that amazing season. A few years ago, when they brought in Nnamdi Asomugha and all those players came in, they got a star-studded, loaded team, and it just didn't work. These all-star teams that are cobbled together in free agency and via trades, as opposed to drafting and developing and creating this band of brothers the way that the Seahawks did, very rarely work. And they've got some volatile people on that roster. How is Peters going to settle in? How are they going to feel when... How's Aaron Donald going to be feeling now that Brandon Cooks has been paid? How is Marcus Peters going to feel when Aaron Donald gets paid? How's Ndamukong Suh going to feel when Aaron Donald gets paid? These are all the kind of question marks that you've got to think of. And the other thing here, Kenny, is that they were kind of lucky last year. They was obviously a great team, but they didn't have any significant injuries. They kind of went through the year pretty clean, and then obviously stumbled when they played the Falcons in the playoffs. I just got to wonder a little bit. I mean, they were even lucky when they played the Seahawks, Kenny, with Bobby Wagner playing at like 20% capacity. A huge number of injuries for the Seahawks. Played the Seahawks in the perfect storm at the perfect time to go and absolutely embarrass them in Seattle. But when the Seahawks played the Rams in LA, they won the game and probably shouldn't have won it a lot more comfortably than they did. So the Rams will be a hot tip for the Super Bowl this year, but I'm going to wait and see on that one.
Yeah, and one of the big wait and sees is going to be around the San Francisco 49ers, a team that a lot of people have immediately pegged over the Seattle Seahawks and saying that they're the second best team in the NFC West based on their, 5-0 finish last season with Jimmy Garoppolo. And certainly there is reason to believe that the San Francisco 49ers are trending up, with Kyle Shanahan, with Jimmy Garoppolo, that they've got the pieces in place to perhaps, win enough games next season to perhaps get back to the playoffs, to do better than the Seahawks. My estimations come out with the Seahawks and 49ers at this stage being almost neck and neck. I think you have to give the advantage to Russell Wilson over Jimmy Garoppolo 10 times out of 10, and maybe that'll be not true by the end of the season. By the end of the season, Jimmy Garoppolo, maybe he has proven himself, but I don't think he's proven himself through 7 NFL starts, and I don't think he's proven himself based on what we saw last year, that there was so much to like about what he had done, but also in a 5-game sample size, there were also some mistakes, and we don't know exactly what's going to come of a full season. I think he's got a bigger advantage now because he has had the whole offseason and the end of last year to prepare under Kyle Shanahan's system, and we saw Matt Ryan get better after a year to prepare with Kyle Shanahan. So maybe there will be that step forward, but there's also plenty of holes on the San Francisco 49ers roster as far as I can tell. You can look around the wide receivers, the offensive line, the defensive line, the cornerbacks. They did add Richard Sherman, but there's a lot with the 49ers that's still left to be proven. As far as the 49ers go, how up are you on them? Do you think that you're about with everybody else and you think this is the second best team in the division? And how far do you think Jimmy Garoppolo will go this year? Do you think Jimmy Garoppolo is as good as his fans believe that he is, or do you believe that he is maybe more in that middle range, or is there a possibility even for you that Jimmy Garoppolo could be, the bust of the year? Where do you stand with the 49ers and Garoppolo?
Well, I don't think it'd be the bust of the year. I'm not sure whether he's going to be quite as good as some people think. I think that he's going to be pretty good. He's got a great head coach to be working with there, Kyle Shanahan's offense. Obviously did great things for Matt Ryan. I think it will elevate Garoppolo's play, and I suspect that he will be a very good quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. Whether he's ever going to be the guy, the one that goes on and leads the team to Super Bowls, we have to wait and see. I mean, who can predict that right now? He's had a few starts in the league. He's been in the league an awful long time. We have to actually see him over a 16-game season. Is he going to stay healthy? Is he going to be consistent? Is he going to be as prolific as Ryan was in this offense? These are the kind of things we have to wait and see. It's almost impossible to predict just how good he's going to be. I think he's going to be pretty good, though. I think that he will be a plus point for the 49ers based on what we've seen so far. I think that they'll be okay. I think they will manufacture offense. I don't think that they've got amazing talent at running back. Obviously, Jerick McKinnon's very explosive player, will suit that kind of offense. It still feels to me like they could do with one more back you kind of really feel good about in that backfield. In terms of the receivers, I've always liked Pierre Garçon, but he's getting old now. Marquise Goodwin has got that speed that they really like, but there's been a high pick on Dante Pettis. Is he going to come good for them in that offense? They're okay at tight end. They've got some young talent there that they might be able to develop, and they've got an offensive line that they've really invested in with Mike McGlinchey coming in to play offensive tackle with that top 10 pick, and bookend Joe Staley. So, the offense, you can sort of see it's starting to build. It might be a year away from being at its absolute best. I still think they need some playmakers on there to fit around Garoppolo. They've not been as aggressive as the Rams have, for example, in trying to find those guys. That's probably what their next step's going to be. And then you might say, listen, they're going to be really difficult to stop. They're going to be a tough opponent to handle. And that's 2 in the division then, 2 really good offenses that you're going to have to deal with. I think defensively, there are some question marks, though. I think in terms of their defensive line, there's a big question mark as to who is going to provide that consistent pass rush. They've spent 3 first-round picks, high first-round picks on Arik Armstead, DeForest Buckner, and Solomon Thomas. Are those 3 going to be ever any more than just sort of solid role players, or are they going to be able to go that next step and say, listen, they're going to wreck games, they're going to dominate games, they're going to beast you up front, they're going to get sacks? There's a question mark as to who's going to provide the sacks for them there. You look at the linebacker position, Reuben Foster's got a lot of talent, a lot of potential, but a lot of issues that he's having to deal with at the moment. Is he going to be able to sort of move on from that if he's playing, when he's playing, and take the next step? Fred Warner, they brought in the draft as well, kind of like him, but someone that they're going to have to develop a little bit. And then the DBs. And Obviously, Richard Sherman stands out. He's a question mark. He's coming back from a very serious injury. He's in a very different defense now. It's sort of the same. The defensive coordinator's from the Carroll tree, but it's not Pete Carroll. And Pete Carroll's the defensive coordinator, the defensive guru in Seattle. He's the one who drafted Sherman. He's the one who put him in a position to succeed. This is a different defense now. Let's see how Richard Sherman gets on. He's also not got Earl Thomas at free safety in this team. And the rest of the secondary is a big question mark for me. So they're a team that's trending upwards. They're a trendy team. Garoppolo is producing a lot of that. It's also very easy to forget that for the first part of last season, before they finished strong, didn't they? They kind of built some momentum probably from Garoppolo and finished strongly and had the unbeaten end of the season. But before that, they couldn't win a game and they really struggled. And what's the real 49ers? You've seen two extremes there. Is Garoppolo capable of elevating them to 10 plus wins, or is it going to balance out and be 7 to 9? I think they've got the potential to be a 9-10 win team, but we have to see Garoppolo over a season. It's very difficult to judge him. And also, I agree that one of the things that people quickly forgot was the 1-10 start, which a lot of those players and positions remain, and there was a lot to fix. And they had a couple close wins there at the end. It could have just as easily been 3-13, and Garoppolo goes 3-2 or whatever, which would have been also much more positive. I'm not saying that it's not positive, but I also, looking at the beginning of the 49ers schedule this season, and I have to preface again, the Seahawks have also a difficult schedule and also go on the road a lot in the first half of the year. 49ers no different. So if there's something to be said for both of these teams, it's they're going to have a struggle. They're going to have a struggle to win early on in the year because they will be going on the road. So Rob, if I present to you this schedule for the 49ers, open at Minnesota, then they go home and take on the Lions, then they go to Kansas City, then they go to LA to take on the Chargers. So 3 of their first games are on the road, including against the Vikings, Chiefs, and Chargers. Then home against the Cardinals. Then they go to Green Bay. Then they host the Rams. Then they go on the road again to face the Cardinals. So that's a divisional road game. So that's 5 of their first 8 games are on the road, including in Minnesota, in Kansas City, against the Chargers, against Green Bay, and a divisional game in Arizona. And when you look at that, and their bye week isn't until week 11, whereas the Seahawks get a little bit of an early bye week in week 7. When you hear that schedule for the 49ers, I mean, it would be really impressive if in their first 8 games they went 5-3 even. I think that would be impressive. 6-2 would be phenomenal. But if they come out of that at 3-5, I don't think it would be that outlandish to say the 49ers with that many road games, especially the Packers. You've got to take on Aaron Rodgers, the Chargers, who I think might be the best team in the AFC. The Chiefs, we don't know where they stand. The Vikings now with Kirk Cousins. If you were looking at that schedule, do you think anything above 3-5 should be considered a victory for the 49ers at that point? Did you know what? You bringing up the schedule, Kenny, has highlighted a really great point, and that's from the sort of the media perspective. Because I've never even looked at the 49ers schedule. I had no idea how it was panning out, and looking at it now, I'm thinking, wow, that is a really difficult first half of the season. And yet, all you hear in the media is because they finished strongly. You mentioned the 1-10 start. They finished strongly. They won some games. Jimmy Garoppolo won some games. So everything's positive. Everything's moving in the right direction. Oh, they drafted an offensive lineman in the first round. Oh, everybody likes that move. It's that kind of positive. Everything's positive. They're a positive media story in the way that the Seahawks are a negative media story. It's very easy. There's a narrative to build there of positivity for the 49ers. And that's kind of what the media looks for in the NFL. It's kind of, the teams that are neither here nor there are difficult to judge. They're the boring ones you don't want to write about. You want to write about the team. The media will focus on the teams that have got a positive narrative, and then they'll overemphasize it and go over the top on it. And then when it's the Seahawks are losing all their players and there's the infighting and there's Earl Thomas, it's an overly negative narrative that's created. And I think that in this case, it is an overly positive one for the 49ers because they're going to really struggle to win week 1 against the Vikings. And the Lions, that could be a 50-50. Matt Stafford is never an easy out. The Lions are capable of winning or losing any week, but that could be a tricky one. They've got a new coach. Is he going to sort out that defense? Are you going to bring some of that Patriots magic to the Lions in week 2? The Chiefs, I think that's going to be a really difficult game. I fancy the Chiefs to have a really strong start the way they did last year. The Chargers, you mentioned there, a bit unpredictable, but they've got the names, they've got the players, they've got the possibility of being a real threat in the AFC. Cardinals, I don't think are going to trouble people too much this year, but then they have to go to the Packers and then the Rams, and you're looking at that and you're thinking, where are the wins coming from there? And it doesn't get much easier because they play the Raiders, rivalry game. They get the Giants, who knows what they're going to be like. Then they have to go to the Buccaneers and the Seahawks. So they could be banking on their run at the end of the year, Broncos, Seahawks, Bears, and then traveling to the Rams. Is they're probably going to sort of feel get to those final 4 or 5 with 5-6 wins at least, and give yourself a chance to finish strong and get into the playoffs. But that's going to be such a big ask. To get to the nice part of the schedule with the Broncos, the Seahawks, and the Bears all at home in back-to-back weeks, 3 consecutive home games, Broncos, Seahawks, Bears. To get to that run, you have to go through such a gauntlet. And reading that schedule, I'm less optimistic for the 49ers than I was before we had this conversation.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And as I mentioned, the Seahawks also, they go on the road, but they don't have as tough of road games to open the year at Denver, at Chicago, then at Arizona, at Oakland, at Detroit, at the Rams. I mean, those are I'm skipping over some home games, but it's not even close to at Green Bay, at Minnesota, at Kansas City, at the Chargers. I mean, that's very difficult, especially as you're figuring out, new pieces, new players, trying to prove yourself. The Seahawks have to do it too. Both of these teams need to try and come out of their midway point with winning records, or at least 500, because then they do get the home games. But yeah, that's something to highlight. Not necessarily something that I don't know if I had really looked at it before right now either. And so that's something to note. And you mentioned the Arizona Cardinals and why they might not be a team to fear. And I don't think that that's something to necessarily disagree with. I wrote about the Cardinals this week and why I think a lot of their season just hinges on the play of the offensive line, because they do get the offensive line together. If for whatever reason they had a top 5 or top 10 offensive line, and their best chance of doing that is their offensive line coach, whose name is escaping me at this very moment. But he did do a great job with the Carolina Panthers with Andrew Norwell and Trey Turner, who are not, high draft picks or anything like that. And he did be able to turn them into elite players for the Carolina Panthers. And maybe he can do something, but it's injuries that have befallen DJ Humphries, Mike Iupati, Justin Pugh. These are guys, and then it's just not necessarily the best play that we've seen out of most of these guys. They signed Justin Pugh to a big contract, but it's going to come down a lot for me for the offensive line, because if the offensive line plays well, then maybe Sam Bradford has a chance. If they don't, and then you're off to Josh Rosen pretty quickly, and we don't know what kind of predictability or volatility that you get out of a quarterback at his rookie season. Maybe he's Russell Wilson. Maybe he's Deshaun Watson. He's probably not, and that doesn't mean that one day he won't be, but it just means to get a player to play at that level as a rookie is still extremely rare. And even Sam Bradford is not the best quarterback. He's a pretty average quarterback. He could fall into that fourth. I think he's the 4th best quarterback in the division, even at his ceiling most of the time, and certainly going to have a hard time cracking the top 12 of the NFC. So that's where really the Arizona Cardinals don't have the best, for me, chance of making the playoffs. That being said, if they can limit the amount of opportunities that they need to give to their quarterback, because David Johnson is having an MVP season like he did 2 years ago, then there's something to talk about. Larry Fitzgerald's still a Hall of Fame player who had 100 balls caught over each of the last 3 seasons. It's not like he's making a lot of yardage with the plays, but it is something that is, pretty valuable especially to the Arizona Cardinals, who will just need to sort of move down the field. And this is a team that had the number 4 defense in the NFL by DVOA last season, number 1 against the run, number 10 against the pass. They do have some elite players. Budda Baker is perhaps just getting started. Chandler Jones is perhaps the defensive player of the year. I don't think that the Arizona Cardinals will necessarily win more than, for me, 6 games. I want to be generous as possible with that number. I think a big reason for it is simply the competition. And like I said, relative is really much the name of the game, is how relatively good you are. And if you've got the 4th best quarterback, if your offensive line is struggling, it's going to be hard for them to compete with the teams like the Rams, the Seahawks, and even the 49ers. But Rob, where do you see the ceiling for the Arizona Cardinals? Do you see a positive outcome? And do you think that maybe we are underestimating how good this defense can be? And perhaps another aspect that we never talk about is the fact that, we talk a lot about a lot of new head coaches, whether it is Patricia, whether it is, some other, hot name that comes along. Nobody talks about Steve Wilks. And I think there's a chance that Steve Wilks could be the best head coach that was hired this year. We just don't really know yet, but there's a chance. And that always gives teams the advantage. Some team in the NFL is going to come from nowhere this year to make the playoffs. At least one team is going to do that. We're not talking about that team. Is there any chance that it's the Arizona Cardinals?
No, not for me. I don't think so. I think that they're going to be pretty bad this year. Their defense always thrived because of Calais Campbell and scheming, and their blitz heavy, you don't know where we're coming from next kind of scheme that they had. And that's gone. That has gone. Campbell's in Jacksonville. The scheme's gone. They're switching, presumably, I've not studied them, but I imagine that Steve Wilks is going to switch the scheme to be more of the defense in Carolina. Sadly, he doesn't get to bring a lot of the guys that play defense in Carolina with him, or in fact, the head coach who is a defensive-minded head coach, Ron Rivera. So I'm not overly optimistic there. They do have some decent players on defense, but the switching of the scheme and the losing what made them so dangerous, which is just like, oh my God, here comes an army of defenders. It almost, whenever they played the Seahawks in Seattle, it always kind of felt like they had an extra defender on the field because there was always a free blitzer. And that is some really cool scheming and blitzing and the way that they did things. And it kept Seattle, it gave them headaches every single week. And that's not going to be that way anymore. So that's one thing they've lost. And on offense, yeah, I get the point on the coach. He's Ray Brown. He's the offensive line coach. He's gone from Carolina there. I always kind of felt like in Carolina they just bunched everything up and almost closed the gaps and said, okay, we're going to let teams almost have a little bit of an advantage off the edge because Cam's in the pocket and he can stand tall and he can. I mean, Cam Newton has just got this really exceptional, just like a flick of the wrists, and this bullet comes out and he hits Greg Olsen every single time, and it's almost impossible to stop sometimes. And he can he's essentially an offensive lineman in terms of size himself, Cam Newton. So he just kind of stands in the pocket and can just throw these things he can create. So Sam Bradford is not that guy. Sam Bradford is made out of plasticine. He will get a couple of hits and he'll be out for the year. If you can keep him upright, then there's definitely some potential there. I always felt in Carolina the running game succeeded because of Cam more than anything, and the running backs kind of just sort of rammed it up the middle and just kept the defense honest. Now in Arizona, they're going to be relying on David Johnson a lot more. I think teams will essentially try and destroy that offensive line and get to Johnson and attack the running game and say if Sam Bradford beats you, then all power to him. And if he gets injured, then it's the Josh Rosen show. I don't know. And David Johnson himself is coming off a serious injury. Who knows how that's going to impact him or whether he's ever going to be the same player again. So I think there's some huge doubts there. Wilks is an unknown coach. I think through the coaching process with some teams, Kenny, you almost sit there and think, what are they doing? And I'm not saying that about the appointment of Steve Wilks. It's just that the Cardinals all the teams were they were interviewing guys and they were thinking about interviewing guys and there was speculation about who they might speak to or who they were targeting. And while all that was going on, it just felt like the Cardinals were kind of just had their feet up, like smoking a cigar, or had just gone off for a vacation during the off season. And then Steve Wilks, if memory serves, had a few interviews and was linked to some jobs and didn't get them. And then all of a sudden, it was almost like he was the one left for the Arizona Cardinals, and they just kind of went and appointed him. I think I'm right in saying they were one of the last teams to appoint, if not the last team to appoint. It just didn't seem like there was a plan in place there. What I liked most about the Seahawks when they fired Jim Mora is they fired Jim Mora, and within 10 minutes of firing Jim Mora, Pete Carroll's name emerged. And it was like, okay, there's a thought process. The Seahawks have got a plan. They've thought about this. They've not just fired Mora and then just gone off into the wilderness to try and find the next coach. They knew what they were trying to do. And I always think that the good teams do that. You replace the coach and you go, this is our guy. We're going to go and get him. And you land him. And with the Cardinals, it kind of felt like they did the opposite. It was just like, okay, the coach is retired. Let's just take a time and see how this unfolds. And then they ended up appointing the guy that was left. So maybe he's going to prove me wrong. Maybe we'll look back on this podcast and think what a load of rubbish that was. I've just spoken. But I just don't have it. I think in a really tough division this year, I can't see the Cardinals having much of an impact. And I think it's going to be tough over the next few years. They're going to have to really rebuild that team in a way around Josh Rosen, and I'm just not sure that's the best environment for him. I think if the other head coach was in charge still, and the sort of the crazy genius that he has about him on offense, he might have been great for Josh Rosen, but he's not there anymore, so I'm not optimistic for him.
There you go. To wrap up this episode of the podcast, since we are talking about opponents and other teams in the NFC and the teams that the Seahawks will be facing, I want to touch briefly on some of their early season opponents with just one quick question. One hanging, just sort of lingering question about each of these teams and see what your opinion is, Rob. And we'll start off with the Denver Broncos. The Seahawks travel September 9th to face the Denver Broncos at 1:25 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So it's an afternoon game. The Seahawks, not a lot of early morning games this year, or at least, not as many, fewer than they, as many as they'd like, maybe. I think there's 3. So the Denver Broncos, their big acquisition last year, when looking at the last couple of years, their problem was at quarterback. Their big acquisition this year was Case Keenum, but Case Keenum's, just had this one successful year with the Minnesota Vikings, playing with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. And I think so quietly, I don't know how quiet it is or not, but somehow, I don't know where your opinion is on Stephon Diggs, but I think some people would have the opinion that Stephon Diggs is one of the top 5 receivers in the NFL. If not right now, that he's going in that direction to perhaps in a couple of years be the best receiver in the NFL. I think some people can see some of the numbers and the advanced stats and the things that he's doing right now, and without really as much of a quarterback for a lot of those years, that Stephon Diggs may be a great player. I'm not even talking about the Vikings. Somehow I've just started talking about Stephon Diggs. But with the Denver Broncos acquiring Case Keenum, now Keenum working with Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas, and for the Broncos, who really haven't done that good of a job developing their quarterbacks over the last couple of years. So the big lingering question is, Seattle travels to Denver to open up the year. Do you think Case Keenum was a good acquisition? And do you think that, that the Seahawks will be facing a quarterback who will be successful next season?
I think they're facing a quarterback who can be. I like Case Keenum. I like his story. I like him as a guy, but I think he's an irritating quarterback. He's the kind of quarterback who is not physically very good, but he's capable on any given day of just producing that kind of slow death game whereby every little 5 to 10 yard pass comes off, every little bit of magic he tries comes off, and you end up finishing the game wondering how on earth has he had that kind of performance, and you've been beaten. So he's that kind of guy. I don't think he's going to be able to repeat the success he had in Minnesota and Denver. I think Minnesota are one of the best coached teams in the league. Mike Zimmer's a brilliant coach. Great defense, great running game, know what they want to do, execute. They play their kind of football. The Seahawks wish they were the Vikings over the last few years. That's what they're trying to get back to. They know who they are and what they are and the direction that they're going in. And Case Keenum has got that kind of bit between his teeth. I'm going to show the league, and I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to get this opportunity and take it on. It's hard to repeat that when you've been paid a lot of money. And I just think that Denver are badly coached, bad running game, aging offensive weapons, not a great offensive line, aging defense, not as been as good as it was when they won the Super Bowl, bad team. I just don't see. They might be at the Seahawks in week 1, but I don't see a team that's going to do much this year.
Week 2, Monday Night Football at the Chicago Bears. Paraphrasing perhaps something that Mitchell Trubisky said recently, he's going to make people eat their words. The ones who maybe didn't believe in Trubisky as being a high draft pick, as being as the top quarterback. He went over to Deshaun Watson, some of these guys. The Chicago Bears, they've got Matt Nagy, the new head coach. The question being, Monday Night Football, are they going to be facing a Mitchell Trubisky who takes that giant year 2 leap like Carson Wentz and Jared Goff did, or is Mitchell Trubisky not going to be the answer this season?
Well, first of all, I don't like the way that Matt Nagy or whatever pronounces his name. There's a girl who I work with, and she's called and she pronounces it Naj, and it's a Hungarian name, and it bothers me that you Americans have changed the pronunciation of that. And Naj sounds, it's easier to say than Nagy. So that's the first gripe. That's the first gripe with the Bears. The second, I don't really know what to expect from them, because they to me seem like a team that's still a couple of years away from being anything. And I liked Trubisky, liked him at North Carolina, liked him at times in what he did in Chicago. Still think that they need to take a few baby steps this year, that they're still quite a way off from being the team that they could be. But if they actually find a coach who can develop some guys and a quarterback, if Trubisky continues and can knuckle down and sort of stay on the straight and narrow, and he's kind of got, funnily enough, similar improvisation and ability that, kind of a young Aaron Rodgers. I'm not saying he's going to be Aaron Rodgers, but you kind of see some similarities in the early days in the NFL there. So if Nagy's the one to coach them up, then they could be good in a few years. But I think this year might be a bit too soon for them.
Week 3, the Seahawks have their home debut September 23rd afternoon. They'll be hosting the Dallas Cowboys. One of the big losses for the Dallas Cowboys last season was Ezekiel Elliott for 6 games. And now Ezekiel Elliott coming back. Maybe he's motivated to, go back to, get an MVP in there, prove that, he was a big act with, that he was a big loss last season when he was suspended, and that the offensive line and Dak Prescott and Jason Garrett and everybody will be sort of circling around Ezekiel Elliott to make him this star player, to have everything sort of run through Elliott in a way that a lot of NFL teams don't do with their running backs anymore. Do you think Ezekiel Elliott will just run all over the Seahawks in week 3 if he's healthy, if the offensive line is there? Do you think Ezekiel Elliott can help the Cowboys go on the road and beat the Seahawks?
Well, yeah, it could do. I think we'll learn a lot about the Seahawks in this game, because at the end of last season, the Seahawks won in Dallas, and they won against Zeke and they won against Dak Prescott, and there wasn't really an excuse there for Dallas not to win that game. I mean, both teams had to win it, and the Seahawks won it fairly well in the end. It was probably the most satisfying win of the season, I'd say, overall. And I genuinely think we'll learn a lot about the Seahawks here. Can they stop the run? Can they limit the damage on defense? Can they stop the combination of Prescott and his mobility in his arm and Zeke and that offensive line? Can they create a bit of a pass rush against the top opponent? Can they make life uncomfortable for Dak? Can they limit Zeke Elliott? I don't think you're ever going to fully stop him, but can they limit him? And if they can do that, then you can get stuck into that Dallas defense, because it's not very good at all. So, yeah, I think this is going to be I think this, more than the other two, is where we'll learn a lot. If they can throw a few punches at this Dallas team, really get after them, run the ball well, play good defense against this offensive line, and just get out with a really hard-fought, typical hard-nosed Pete Carroll victory, then it could be the thing that just propels the Seahawks forward to having a really good year. But that's just an interesting start to the season. Denver, winnable, but on the road in week 1 against an irritating quarterback who can beat anybody and lose to anybody at the same time. You've got the Bears, a developing team, Monday Night Football. Can you go there and run the ball and win the game that way? And then can you just go toe-to-toe with Dallas and come out on the other side on top? And if you can, what a launch pad for the rest of the season. If you can start this season well for the first time, not have a slow start, come out running the ball, protect Russell Wilson, get these young guys on the field on defense making plays, get some turnovers, start building that momentum. If they can do that, then they can have a much better year than people think.
And, we talked about the Arizona Cardinals. We talked about the LA Rams. Let's wrap up the podcast just talking about, we'll talk about their week 6 game, because it's just before the bye week. And then we'll discuss just briefly what your thoughts are of what their record will be after 6 games, or just a guess at what they could be after 6 games. So they go to Arizona, they host the Rams. And then in week 6 at Oakland Raiders, Marshawn Lynch will be the focus for a lot of people. If he's on the field, 32 years old, if Marshawn Lynch is still a healthy and active and important key piece of that offense, then of course he will be the focus for a lot of people facing the Seahawks in the regular season. Derek Carr, one of the highest paid players in the NFL, not producing at that type of level. Where will he be standing? But really it just comes down to, for you, Rob Staton, I don't know if we've discussed this or not, but John Gruden, the hiring, huge contract, everything around the reunion between the Raiders and John Gruden. In that perspective, John Gruden, was he the best hire of the offseason? Was he the worst hire of the offseason? Somewhere in the middle? Did the Raiders make a mistake by hiring John Gruden?
Oh, that is a good question. to be perfectly honest, I had no idea what John Gruden was like until I watched a few. I don't know if they were documentaries or behind the scenes or I don't know how you describe them. Sort of footage of his time in Oakland before, and he just seemed like a really horrible person. I mean, the John Gruden that I kind of came to know was the one who was a bit of a caricature during the draft and doing the QB coaching things, and then the guy in the booth who just was overly positive about everybody. And then you actually see him as a coach, and you were thinking, my God, you'd hate to be around this guy. You'd want to, after about 6 weeks of his company, you'd just want to just run away screaming. So I don't know how that's going to resonate. Derek Carr, I don't know. I mean, it's a couple of years ago, you thought that he was going to, wow, what a draft pick, and he's going to develop, and then you just see, the cut-ups that people do on put them on Twitter and stuff like that, and you see the bad throws that he makes and the way they completely regressed last year. And you look at it and you think, is Marshawn still going to do it for them? And what weapons have they got on offense? Is the offensive line what it's supposed to be for all the money they've got? Have they got enough on defense, or is it just Khalil Mack and Bruce? I don't know. I mean, is he a good hire? Do you know what I think my prediction would be, Kenny, is that it's probably going to go the way that it ended with the Buccaneers, which is the Buccaneers were fairly competitive at the last days of Gruden, and you wouldn't necessarily call them an easy team to play, but it just didn't seem to click. And it just seemed that they were getting in their own way a little bit. And I just wonder whether that's going to happen to Gruden, whether they're going to be sort of like a 7-9, 8-8 team type of thing. I just don't have a good vibe about that. And you just never know. The let's have one last go in Oakland before moving to Las Vegas could play a part. Maybe Marshawn sort of feeds off that. Maybe he has a bit of a honeymoon period, Gruden, at the start of the year, and he gets them in a position where they win a lot of games early, and then they build off that. But I'm not particularly enthusiastic about them. The Week 6 game, I confirmed this week, Kenny, that I'm actually going to be at that game. In one form or another. I have actually got a ticket for the game now. So I will either be in the stadium or in the press room, in the press box, one way or another. So I'm looking forward to being there at Tottenham's new stadium. It'll be brand new. Seahawks playing the Raiders. And I'm hoping that the Seahawks are going to come to my good country, and they're going to do a little better than the last time I watched them play a year ago when they played the Redskins. So fingers crossed the Seahawks get a win in that one.
All right, so finally, just the Seahawks' first 6 games prediction. What do they go into that bye week with? You got at Denver, at Chicago on Monday Night Football, hosting the Cowboys, at Arizona, hosting the Rams, and at Oakland. If you look at that schedule, 4 road games, but perhaps some of the more winnable road games for the Seahawks. They don't have to travel too much. A lot of West Coast road games. And then the furthest one in Chicago is on Monday Night Football, where Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll have thrived. Certainly, this is going to be Trubisky's biggest game to date, and just sort of another ho-hum, perhaps, holiday for Russell Wilson. Whether that's I don't think Russell Wilson ever takes a holiday, but certainly maybe that there's some advantages there in terms of road games go. And then hosting the Cowboys and the Rams, 2 really good offenses, really good defense for the Rams. Where do you stand on the Seahawks? What do they go into that bye week with?
Well, I reserve the right to change this. This is not. I mean, obviously, we've got to go through training camp and the preseason first. So this could change. But the Seahawks never start well. They never have a fast start to a season, do they? So apart from 2013, I suppose. But so I'm not going to say that they're going to win the 2 opening games on the road. I'm going to say that I'll give them one and say that they lose the other. So we'll say 1-1 to start. Last time they had 2 road games and a safety held out to start the season. They went 0-2 to start the year, but neither Denver or Chicago or Green Bay or the Rams. So I'll say 1-1 to start. I will say that they beat the Cowboys in their first home game and just the opening game. Wanting to prove a point, I'll say that they get a victory against Dallas. I'll say that they get a victory against Arizona as well. So that would put them at 3-1. And then I'll have them losing against the Rams, just because I don't know. I just don't want to be overly massively positive right now. So I'll say that they lose to the Rams at home. Maybe Todd Gurley has a huge game or something. And then I'll have them winning in Oakland. So I'll have them 4-2 going into the bye with some favorable games on the horizon. Maybe the next 3 or 4 might be difficult, but a chance to at home in the last few weeks to really get some wins there. So I think if they can get to 4-2, they were 4-2 in 2012 and won 11 games in the end with a good finish. So get to 4-2 after 6 games. I think the Seahawks would take that.
And I'll say that my feeling is 4-2, but I'm going to knock it down a peg to try for accuracy and say 3-3. Say the Seahawks go into the bye week in 3-3, which I think would be perfectly okay. Say they lose to the Denver Broncos in week 1 because they seem to always lose their road games in week 1. Not always. I think they beat the Carolina Panthers a few years ago, but I will say they lose to the Denver. They beat Chicago. They beat the Dallas Cowboys. They lose to Arizona on the road because you're just not going to beat every opponent that you're better at, especially when it's on the road. They lose to the Rams and they beat the Raiders. So that's how I'll put them at 3-3, an unfortunate 0-2 in the NFC West. Not a great start, but then after the bye week, if they can beat the Detroit Lions in week 8, then they've got a lot of home games dated for the rest of the season against tough opponents like the Chargers and the Packers and the Vikings and the Chiefs, and 2 games against the Niners. But certainly I think 3-3 would be acceptable, and I guess that's where I'll place them right now.
Yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see 3-3. Definitely stuff. I will say this though, I'm glad that the season's nearly here. I'm getting excited now that the summer for me hasn't dragged as much because the World Cup's been on. So I completely forgot about the NFL, and then the World Cup finished. So now it's nearly here. Training camp's nearly here. Can't wait for this. I think like 50 days till the season begins. So looking forward to that. And I'm glad. And the sooner it gets here, the better, Kenny. Because and I have to say this podcast has been a nice thing for me, because this is the first time in 7 days that I haven't been thinking about England losing at the World Cup a week ago. It was a week today, and it's taken my mind off it for the first time. It has not popped into my mind that England were this close to get into a World Cup final for the first time in my life. So thank God for the Seahawks being here to take my mind off that.
There you go. Well, this has been another episode of 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a Seahawks podcast. You can follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Staton. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com to follow his articles there. You can find us at Field Gulls and FieldGulls.com. Of course, I'm at Kenneth Arthur S. If you want to support the podcast financially, you can do that at Patreon.com/FieldGulls, where that's basically all just for the podcast here, 3000 NFL Mock Draft. Thanks to Freedive Records for the opening and ending theme song. I love it. It sounds really good, and it really gets me in the mood for listening to this show. And he's also taken out some of the pops, I think, in the audio. So thank you to Freedive Records there for that. And that's it for this episode of 3000 NFL Mock Draft. Come back next week for a brand new draft.